Good morning. We're in the middle of Tafrei Tzadik Daled, which is page 53. Page. Middle of Tafrei Tzadik Daled, which is and we are sorry about that. We're on page 53. No, actually on page 54, sorry. Page 54 in Tzadik Daled. Yeah. And this is all the Rebbe Friedrich Rebbe explaining, citing and explaining Hemshech Ayin Beis, page 11, volume 2, page 1147 through 1149. So let me just sum up where we are. As far as the central theme that we're addressing now is Yesh Ayin Yesh, that all of existence and beyond existence, from the highest levels to the lowest levels, and even before you can even call it levels, he said breaks into Yesh Hamiti, the true absolute reality of the source, Atzmus, Yesh HaNivra, the other end of the spectrum, the created Yesh, created existence, that's us. And the Ayin Beis, like we'll call it, the channel, the field of energy, the Oyer, called Ayin. Either to the fact because it's mysterious to us, so it's Ayin, or it's bottle and tuffle completely to the source, that's why it's Ayin as bottle, is the channel in between that carries the creative energy in the whole process. And that Ayin breaks into two. An Ayin that relates more to the creator, Yesh Amiti, called Ayin Amiti, and the Ayin that relates more to existence. So I just mentioned quickly, but the Ayin means nothingness. So nothingness can mean it's nothing because we don't relate to it. That's how we would look at it. Yesh Ma'ayin doesn't mean there's nothing there. It means it's beyond us. And then there's an Ayin that is meaning it's nothing because it's completely nullified and bottled to its source. So we're going to learn more about this, but I just wanted to say that's a way of understanding the two levels of Ayin. But both of them are Oyer, and there are two dimensions in the Ayin breaks into two Ayin. Now, in understanding that this middle level, so to speak, this interface called Ayin Oyer, because it's not Etzem, even though it reflects completely the Etzem, it is subject to levels. That's why you have two levels of Ayin, and many more when you break it down further. Because its purpose is to carry something. And a carrier, not a source, a carrier by definition means it's going to get diminished. Just like sunlight gets weaker as it leaves, as it's farther from the sun, or the example he gave, the Eir HaVuka, the light of the torch gets weaker as you go away from the torch, this Eir is subject to diminishment. It always remains Eir. Remember that. It's not going to turn into Yesh, but it has levels. Now, in understanding these levels, the Rebbe Rashab went into the concept of Ratzon. The Friedrich Rebbe took it a whole new level. So we're now discussing Ratzon. Before we get back to the Ayin, to the Oyer, we're talking about in this Oyer, Poshet, in the shapeless Oyer, is Ola B'Ritzeinei. God arises in his will. Will is established now. Now, will, however subtle it may be, and even the highest levels, is already a level that relates to the thing that's being desired. That's what desire means. It's desires and some objective. So yes, we spoke about a Ratzon Atzmi that has no kavana pnimis, like the father, the love of between parent and child. There's no kavana there. Here we're talking about a Ratzon that does have a kavana. The kavana is to create, to fulfill the purpose. But it does not have a tam. It's not a rational, though it has an objective. And then there's a level of Ratzon, the next level, that's called Ratzon, Koyach HaRatzon, or or I'm sorry, that's Ratzon Hagoli. So it's an active desire that wants something and pursues it. Like you said, Hatoya v'amshacha, it's drawn to it. And then there's a level of Ratzon that's higher than that, called Ratzon Hanelam or Koyach HaRatzon. He says there, it's only a heskim v'hechlet. It's only a resolve, a determination that this is worthy of being desired, but it's not actively pursuing it. That's the two levels of Ratzon we learned. I just want to add, just in case, I said it already, but I'll say it again. When we say Nesava Kodesh Baruch Hu Baruch Dir B'Tachtenim, that is not called Ratzon. That is in Atzmos itself. And it's hard to understand because nothing there is stimulated. There's no such thing as a stimulation at all. But nevertheless, it associates with Atzmos. And there, you can't say Atzmos has any relationship with the thing that's being desired. As soon as you say Ratzon, you're saying there's some connection. As far as it may be, it's still somewhat, in the most subtle way, Ratzon relates to the thing that's designed. That means even the Ratzon that he calls that's not Shaykh La'elamis, it's still a desire that's going to lead to a desire that will relate to the Elamis, to existence. It's a very important point to remember. Because even Etzem Ha'er that we learned about, who does Etzem Ha'er, which doesn't even have any manifestation and no Hamshach and no Gilui, why is it there? Because God chose to put it there. Because it will be the beginning of a process that will lead ultimately to existence that the Sava Kadosh Baruch Hu. So basically you can say there are things in Atzmus that completely are Atzmusdik and don't relate at all to existence. It's just what God wants and that's it. I don't want to use the word want. That's what God desires and that's that. Then there are things that God himself said, I want to relate to the thing that's going to be created. I do want to have a relationship with it. And that's where it gives it more tfisas ma. A relationship means that there is some, that it has some it has some value to the Ratzon it values the thing that it's desiring. Whereas Nesava, there's no value. It's just the way it is. Atzmus has a Nesava. And both are necessary because if in the full interface, you want to have something, want to have all of Atzmus there, but you also want us to have a relationship with it. So you have both sides of it. You have the things that just represent Atzmus and the things that already relate to existence.
Are you saying, Rabbi Jacobson, that Nisaba Kodesh Baruch Hu Dir B'Tachtonim, that's a taiva, which is different than Ratzon?
We only use taiva because we have no other word. Yes, but that's what it means. It means that it has there's no reason there. There's no desire. It's not being, the desire is not being fulfilled when God creates. Atzmus Nesava, it's completely Atzmus. And that's all that matters. This is explained by the Rebbe in the Likutei Sichos, the second Sikh of Shmois in volume 6. I don't want to go there because it's complicated to understand.
Right.
But suffice it to say, in that level, there's no such thing as a need. When you say Ratzon, you're already saying, okay, I want it. And once I want it, there's some type of fulfillment. Some type of relationship.
Even though you would think that by saying that God has a type of a dira and in Tachtonim would seem from that itself that there is a relationship with the Tachtonim and some type of relationship there with the dira. So you would think that phrase does have some type of automatic connection with Tachtonim.
That's why I told you to look in that Sikha, and he explains the exact opposite. Really? That's what Nesava is, that it's just Atzmus desires something, and there's no relationship at all together.
Okay. All right.
All that matters there is that Atzmus desires it. That's it. And then there are levels that relate to. Atzmus does not relate to anything. You understand? It's built in Metzias Nimtza. Its existence is so beyond anything that the concept of relationship for Atzmus doesn't make any sense. Relationship only makes sense in the world of existence as we know it. In Atzmus, you can't even talk about relationship. And yet, Atzmus Nesava, that's the closest we can say. Now, once Atzmus Nesava, Dir B'Tachtenim, that's why you're going to have a Rotzen for Elamus. That's why you're going to have an Ein Sof, a relationship with worlds.
He decided to create a Rotzen for himself. He decided to create a Rotzen for himself.
Exactly. No, the point I want to make is, from the point of view of Nesava, there's no relationship. But Nesava, due to that, it causes that Ein Sof should have a relationship. So Atzmus doesn't have the relationship, but he causes Elikus to have a relationship. Because relationship already means something is commensurate to one another. I don't want to go there right now because it's a really a subject. This alone is complicated enough. Even Rotzen that we're talking about, he's already said is beyond existence. And yet something has started to emerge. I'll make one more point just to help. If Atzmus would move from the state of having no relationship and then he has a relationship and it's all in Atzmus, you have two major problems. That you're splitting Atzmus into two, the part that's beyond everything and the part that's Nesava and relating to something. And problem number two is that the Atzmus that is in its purest form is not involved anymore because it's now become Nesava. So that's why the way God did it was a much more intelligent way. Remember, if you have, an Atzmus is only one God. Once you say there's a Rotzen and a Rotzen to create, then there's a relationship between the Rotzen and the thing it's creating. But once you say it's not an Atzmus, you solve both problems. Number one is, Atzmus always remains beyond and one God, and you can't split Atzmus into two. So however you understand it, you have to say Nesava is completely on the terms of Atzmus. I'll use the example I used the other day, or he speaks here. Atzmus gives off Oir. Now, would you say that once Atzmus gives off Oir, a reflection, does Atzmus become like a sun? Absolutely not. The sun, its whole entity is to give off light. That's why it was created. And it has a relationship with light. And even though sunlight is only a reflection of the essential sun, because it is only a reflection, but sun and light have some relationship. Now, Atzmus, we said, is not loizer ikara Atzmus or loizer kola Atzmus, that Oir comes from him. It's far beyond Oir. But even when he gives off, so he doesn't have to give off Oir, he could also not give off Oir, as we learned. But when he starts to give off Oir, does that change Atzmus, has now become a Moir? That's the point. No. It's only the fact is that Atzmus, since he could do everything, he could also take on the shape of a Moir. But the way Moir is in Atzmus is not the way Moir is in sunlight, is in the sun. Because Atzmus never is defined by anything. Even when he's able to do something, it does not define him. He's never nitfas, never confined nor defined by the thing he's doing. How do you capture that and have a relationship with existence if he's not defined by it? That's why you need to always reserve and say, Atzmus, everything within Atzmus, even his power to create and his power to give off light, and even the Rotzen that will come in Oir, are all removed at least one step, if not more steps, from Atzmus itself. So the only way you could talk about Atzmus is say, Atzmus, we cannot ever be Atzmus because there's only one God. And God said to Moshe, no one can see me and live, because if you're me, you're no longer you. So there's no Oir even. If you go into Atzmus, there's no Oir, there's no Rotzen, there's no nothing. And yet, some way, which we can't understand, Atzmus, Nesava, Tachtenim. So you have to understand it in an Atzmisdik way. If you're talking levels in Oir, even Oir Atzmi, and it's definitely Rotzen, then you're talking already how Atzmus has chosen that in his so-called reflection and that which reflects Atzmus, you have now some beginning of a relationship. And yes, the desire relates to that which is desiring. But because now, so you'll say 1 second, but we haven't resolved the issue. So then how do we connect to Atzmus?
We can't.
If that's the case, the relationship is all with everything that's beneath Atzmus. And
Right.
here's the key. Oir. Because Oir is bottled to Atzmus and has no identity of its own. The bittul, because it's like the paradox, the ultimate paradox, because it's completely bottled to the source,
Yes.
it can carry the source, and therefore, through that, we can connect to Atzmus. But it's not on Atzmus terms. It's not Atzmus connecting with us. It's our bittul to him that we lose our whole personality and identity. Then you become one with him. But the problem is, Tachteinin, by definition, the Yesh has a personality. It's not bottle. It's not Oir. That's why you need the combination of both. Oir brings to us the bittul of Atzmus itself. And everything else has an identity. So you really need to figure out, how does identity meet non-identity? How does Yesh meet Oir? And ultimately, Oir will take you into Atzmus. So that's the way it works. If you look at all the dynamics we've been discussing.
Rabbi Dickerson, could I just quick question there? It's so deep. But don't we say then, therefore, that even if we can achieve this ultimate bittul, I mean, you always say that it's the interface, and we're trying to climb up as high as we can go, past Atzilas, past Ritzimtzum, or Ein Sof, all these all those ways up to the highest level. Why don't we just say that the highest level we can reach is Kodesh Baruch Hu Dir V'Tachtoni, come to that level where there's already arose in the God's mind, so to speak, some other thought of besides his total pshitas. Why don't we just say is that's the head of Mount Everest? That's as far as we can go. We can't get to Atzmus Shabbatzmus, which is totally unrelatable to any kind of Nivroim. We never can get there. We can only get to that, which, I mean, only get to. That it would seem like if we can get to Nisava Kodesh Baruch Hu, which is always in Broad and Tanya and everything, it's the beginning of all of the whole relationship. Why don't we just say that that's the ultimate for us, but it's still not reaching the Atzmus Shabbatzmus?
The basic reason is because we want to connect to Atzmus Shabbatzmus.
Oh my gosh!
And we want that and Chassidus insists on having that connection.
And we can do it. We can get there.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, but let me explain.
Mm.
You could only do it mamata lamaila. When you first begin. You have to first relate to godliness in a way that relates to you. If you completely annihilate your personality, you can't jump there, because the whole purpose of Tachtenim, Atzmus Dafke, that's the ultimate paradox. He wants a Tachtenim to connect to Atzmus, and that's only possible for us being a Tachtenim, which means you have to have a unique personality. You have to be a Tachten. So the first steps consists of taking your personality and your selfishness and your nefesh habamis and everything, and start directing it toward not yourself, but toward God. In the beginning, it could be very, very ulterior motives, for your own personal gain, or because you appreciate God, because he's helping your life, There are many different reasons, because it's good. But as you climb and you become acclimated, like a student who's beginning just to learn the first Ayin Beis, the beginning. As you slowly get accustomed to this and your life continues to grow, your avodah continues to grow, and you connect more and more, you start growing level by level by level. There'll be a point, if a person is really going all the way, where your whole identity exists, but you're like a merkavet alakus. That's a tzaddik gomer, like the ovis, like a rebbe, where your whole being is there, but your being is simply a channel for the divine. As one goes higher and higher, you begin to relate to things not from your perspective, but from God's perspective. Now, how does God look at existence? Now, we're talking about God looking at existence. I'm talking about the levels of Oir. So I'm jumping levels now, obviously, but this is why the Avodah is vital, because what I'm saying now is just words. It's very different saying the words and actually implementing them. But if you implemented what I'm saying now, it's a lifetime. It's 1,000 lifetimes. because all these steps, all these stepping stones. And I'm just jumping to where we are because this is so high that most of us, we can't even figure out how to get to Asiyah Ruchnius. Forget about getting Lifnei HaTzimtzum. But let's, for argument, let's do this as a flight of fancy, you know, like a mind experiment where we're imagining what's possible. Let's not. So let's, for argument's sake, a person has refined themselves. They've come to a point where they've transformed their tzimtzum. They've transformed their nefesh abamis. Everything that was egocentric, that was self-oriented, is gone. And not gone through annihilation. We're not talking about destroying yourself. Through avodah, you've refined yourself. Remember, we're not talking about being overpowered or overwhelmed, but you have grown to become this selfless individual, completely dedicated to godliness. Now you've transformed your tzimtzum. He says, then you could start climbing before the tzimtzum. So where do we reach? We reach levels now of elikus, lifnei tzimtzum, that are the beginnings, what we would call like the beginnings of the, I don't want to say Big Bang, but the beginnings of where in the God consciousness, the divine consciousness, which remember, pre-tzimtzum is completely divine consciousness. There's no existence altogether. But in God, in divine consciousness, the beginnings of the glimmers where God said, I will have a relationship with existence. The rotzen for it. Not even the creation. We're not even talking about Mamala Kalam. We're not talking about God actually, the creative energy that is entering into each creature and each part of creation. We're talking about how God wants it. It's all in desire, but it's a desire for it. To the point that he's even Messiah, we learned. He even envisions and he allocates and prepares resources of what this existence is going to look like. So now you could say you're relating to that because you've eliminated all your distractions of your own self, but the self is now relating to how the God is relating to you. What God really desired. What did he desire? He wanted a bittul dika person. So now you're relating to that. The question now is, how high can we go? So we keep going further. Now you're dealing with oyer that doesn't even have a rotzen. So the example I've been giving, and I continue to give, think of the artist that is not even an artist yet. The creation is the art, okay? The art has led us to the artist, but as the artist relates to the art, fine. Now we're coming to a point that the artist has a desire to create art. As a matter of fact, he can create infinite types of art. Let's even say we connected to that. You found out that this artist has far more possibilities than the one art, the 10 spheres that you relate to. Good. But then you come to a point, he's not even an artist. He's not even have a desire to be an artist. He's an entity that is, whatever it is. He's a shapeless entity. That's Ein Sof before there's a Ratzon. That's the artist before he even desired to become an artist, and definitely before he had desire to create art and a specific type of art. Now the question is, how deep can this go? So Chassidus says, this is the Chiddush of the Alter Rebbe. Only the Alter Rebbe was Machadish Inyan of Oyer. All the Kabbalists said what you just said before, Eliezer. That you can reach Ratzon, you can reach Keser, you can reach Ein Sof, but you can't reach Ein Tchila. Because Atzmus is either off limits, or if we reach him, it's not going to be you anymore, because it's no longer you. But here's the key. Since Oyer exists, Oyer Atzmi, and then there's Oyer HaKol Ba'atzmusei, we learned. The true Oyer HaKol Ba'atzmusei, how Atzmus has the Yechelis, the capacity to give Oyer, because Atzmus has that capacity, so in some way, through a proper bittul, and you go through all these levels, you can identify with that. Now, we never become Atzmus, because there's only one God, but we can experience an Atzmus-dika thing more than just a Ratzon, not just God's will, but God himself. Now, here's two more things I want to say. When a person on earth, not in heaven, does a mitzvah maisis, an actual mitzvah, that mitzvah touches Atzmus. We don't know why, but it does. Because Atzmus nesava. It's not because God needs it. It's not because God wants it. Something about this mitzvah is misyachas to atzmus. That's number one. When you do something without any ulterior motive, a simple ish pashut, just has pure faith and acts without any deep kavanas, you're touching atzmus. So the point is not that atzmus needs it, but in his own way, God said, you do that, that is what atzmus is. Because there's nothing about you. As soon as you bring you into the picture, oh, I get something out of it, I have schar, I have personality, I have a kavanah, then you're dealing more on your terms. Now that we also need that. That's why the total fusion is where you have total Kabbalah soil, but you also have total immersion, and it relates to you. That's why you can't jump there right away, because you have to have you in the process. If you jump there right away, you'd be burned up and completely absorbed in the essence, and there would be no you. But if you've gone through everything, you come to a point where you can say the following: that Atzmus, just as he wanted structure, he's also beyond structure. Just as he wanted you as an identity and a personality, he's also beyond personality. And through your bittul, you have some experience of this. And it's strange to say this, but probably each of us would have a different experience of Atzmus, even though from Atzmus' point of view, there's no differences, because it's our experience of it. I don't know if that helped at all, but that is how, more or less, how I would explain some of the taste. Now, one more point. Remember, he said also the Yesh HaNivra gives us Ksas Musag in what Nitzusi Matzmuse is. So not only do we have the ability to reach the highest levels, there's actually something about the Yesh that even the Oyer doesn't have. The Oyer has the Bittel, so it carries everything Atzmus has. But Oyer, by definition, is not Mitzvus Matzmuse. Oyer is on the opposite. Oyer is reflecting its source. So the Yesh, in its Yeshes, Yesh Ma'ayin Ve'efes HaMuchlet, and some other aspects of it that has Ein La'ila V'Siba, gives us also something about Atzmus. So Atzmus has actually embedded himself in some way in the Yesh Dafka, in the Yesh HaNivra. So look, this is very complicated and very dense and abstract, but if you take it all together, suffice it to say, you need to have everything. You need you need Yesh, you need to climb. The Ratzon that we're talking about now is the beginnings of what we'll call a relationship. Remember, we talk about interface. Let me analyze interface. Can you really have an interface with Atzmus? Or you have an interface with what Atzmus desired to desire that you should have an interface with? Remember, Atzmus is not interfaceable. Atzmus is Atzmus. But because God wanted to have a relationship with us, so in his Oyer, which reflects completely him, he didn't create a separate entity. That's the Chiddush of the Alter Rebbe. If God would have said, after Atzmus comes Ratzon or Keser, then you have yourself a split. Because Ratzon and Keser are already a state. They're the state of desire. The first step is Oyer. That's the Chiddush of the Alter Rebbe, Oyer. Once it's Oyer, Oyer is a shapeless field of energy that reflects nothing but Atzmus. And yet Atzmus is beyond Oyer. So Oyer has this dual properties. In Oyer, now we could talk about Ratzon and Keser, and Ratzon and before Ratzon and after Ratzon, and levels in Ratzon, until you finally get to the Tzimtzum, and then the rest is simple after the Tzimtzum, we all know, once we talking like that, right? That was a joke, but you get what I'm saying. Okay, I hope this was helpful a bit. What can I say? So if you ask me in Avodah, here's how it works in Avodah. You want a full Atzmizdika experience? It has to be complete. You have to put yourself aside. There's not one iota of something you're getting for it. It's like total Mesiras Nefesh. Then you have an Atzmiz, because you know why? Your identity has decided and chosen to be non-identity. I am not bringing any interest. So when someone really does something for no kavanah at all, like when the Baal Shem Tov said, and he was Moshe Nefesh to help somebody, and they told him in heaven, the Gzeira, you can't help this person is supposed to die. So he said, no, I'm not going to let that person die. And they said, it'll be grave consequences. And Baal Shem Tov still insisted, and he intervened. Tzadik Geizer HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mekayim. Kadosh Baruch Hu Geizer HaKadosh Tzadik Mevatel. So Tzadik has that power. And God said, then from heaven came a baskal that said, because you did it, we had to give in because you're a Tzadik. But because of that, you lose your share in the world to come. So the story goes, the Baal Shem Tov started dancing. His students said, what you dancing about? You lose your share in the world to come. We're not talking about this world, this material, temporal world. We're talking about Elam Haba. So he said, because now I can begin to serve God for no ulterior motive at all. Completely lishma, because I'm not getting Elam Haba. Some say there's an addition to the story. I know I'm not ever verified it. Then when heaven heard that, they said, give him back his Elam Haba. That we're not going to give him. They should be able to serve for no kavana at all. That type of schar, no, he can't have. Give him back his Elam Haba. My point that I'm making here is that when the Alter Rebbe said, Im chalei chafatzti, mili b'shamayim, im chalei chafatzti, ich will nicht dein Gan Eden, ich will nicht dein Elam Haba, ich will nur dich allein. What it means is that you are essentially making the choice, and the Alter Rebbe could do that after all his Aveda. Remember, you can't get the B'chol Ma'oitcha if you don't first have B'chol Nafshecha, B'chol Vavcha, B'chol Nafshecha. Then you could say, someone say, well, I can jump straight to B'chol Ma'oitcha. No, there's no Mesiras Nefesh if you don't first have Aveda in your Keiches Gluyim. It's like someone saying, I reached Adala Yoda and they don't have Yoda. You can't get to Adala Yoda if you don't have Yoda first. You first have to be in the box before you get out of the box. So my point is that true Aveda, completely nothing, is Atzmizdik experience. But the Eibusha didn't want that. He wanted Aveda that also you should feel that it's good for you. And you should benefit from it. Because then it's on your terms as well. So I know that's why La'elim Yasik Adam B'Terem Mitzvah Shalei L'Shma, B'Teich Shalei L'Shma, Ba L'Shma. You could say, 1 second, isn't the goal to lose all your interest? Yeah, after you have interest, that's the goal. Because we need you. So if a person's going to destroy themselves in the process of experiencing God, it's not tachtenim. You want tachtenim, and the tachtenim should feel the experience personally and intimately, and that's why you need mamal kalam. You need godliness within you, not just outside of you. You need ava, not just yira. Then as you climb and you are prepared, now you're ready to enter a place where they both come together. Basically, the grandeur and the awe and the distance of God comes together with the closeness of God. And we said, remember, Atzmus is neither close nor distant, but we are in the world of close and distance. So we need to climb. Then you come to a place where you can experience a place that's beyond close and beyond distant. And he said they're both equal when you're dealing with Atzmus. The Yicholte, his capacity to do both. So yes.
But also from Atzmus, there is an Isave. We don't know what it means. You said it, everything milmato l'maylo, but it's not the way that Atzmus is connecting himself to us. But the Nisave, that's not clear enough, but we understand the idea.
Well, the point is Nisave is not called a connection. It's just called Nisave Atzmuse. I suggest you learn the Sikha in Chelik Vav and Likutei Sichos if you want more on this.
You said Parshas Shmois Sikha Beis, Parshas Shmois. That's Chelik Vav?
Yeah. Okay.
But you know, Rabbi Jacobson, you said here we got to go up with Ava and Yira. We have to have both, you know, you have to have Yada before you can come to Adla Yada. But then earlier you just said that you can only experience it by total bittul, total Kabbalah soul without any kavanas at all, just pshitas. Just so which one is it? How can
you need both. Because the kavanas should also come nasa v'nishma. The kavanah is that the tachtenim means it comes into tachtenim. There's the atzmizdika part. That's what I said. You need yesh and oir. You need giluyim and etzem. Okay. You can't just have etzem. In Aveda, I gave you a taste of what etzem is like, but if it's out giluyim, it's not about you. So you're not fulfilling the kavanah. If a person just remains a shepherd boy that just knows how to do kukuriku, and never learns Torah, and never understands the depth of mitzvahs and learns chassidus, no, that's not the kavanah. That he touched Asmus, yes, you touched it. And Yom Kippur, you also touch Asmus, but it's not you. The whole point is the joining of the two.
And that's possible.
Wow. I'm not sure. You're asking a philosophical question or a Vedic question?
Avodadik.
Avoda, then I tell you, go do Aveda, and whatever you can reach, you reach. That's what's asked of you.
got you. Okay.
Let me ask you, does anybody, when they say Shema several times a day, can you tell me the difference in your avodah between b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol maidecha, or just a bunch of lip service?
Honestly, I would say it depends. When I came out of the hospital the first time, I experienced it a different way.
Okay, fine.
But
Okay.
now it's different. It's gone back. I wasn't able to maintain that feeling so much. All right, it's like a contradiction at the same time.
But remember, in Atzmus, there's no contradictions. That's the whole point. As soon as you say it's contradiction, you know it's not Atzmus.
Right.
There comes a point where paradox is completely as simple as no paradox. When you can wrap your head around that, you're getting there.
Good.
Bittul is a key. Bittul is the key because bittul is that opens the door between your mitzias to a higher mitzias. If there was no bittul, we would be an airtight reality. In other words, basically, let's put it this way. If you followed Freudian psychology that the id is all there is and no yid, id, and that selfishness is our inherent state, yeah, of course you can't. You'll only climb that far. You can only be that moral, you know? But once you recognize that there is bittul that leads you from one state to the other, then you have both things. You are there, but you can climb and climb and climb and climb. And bittul leads us into the deepest places. Once you're bottled to something, you can assume its properties even though you are not it. See the point? Okay. So now let's bring it back to where we are right now. Okay, on page 53, chapter 16, the Frierdiker Rebbe, after explaining the revealed level of desire, he said, Yesh oid madrege beratzon, there's a higher. It's either called the power of desire or the ratzon hanelam. And he says, here we have an actual desire, but it's not in any active state of pursuit or being drawn for the thing it's desiring. He calls it a heskem bilvad. It means there's the determination, resolve. And that is an absolute resolve. It's not ambiguous. It's not maybe I want it, maybe I don't. I absolutely want it. But you have not yet done anything to implement that will, that desire. So it's not like the Ratzon HaMuchel Ba'atzmusei, which means something that you're wired and you're not even aware of. That's even before any inspiration or any stimulation. Here there's a stimulation and you're conscious of the desire, but there's no active pursuit and yearning for the thing you're desiring. It says, he's already been inspired or stimulated by the thing he's desiring. And he already had the shakel v'tarya. That's what I'm going to review now. Which means in his desire, he already weighed the options. Should I want it? Should I not want it? And the determination is absolutely I want it. And that will not change. But it may take years till he actually pursues it, which would be the second lower level of desire. Now the Frierdiker Rebbe goes into what does shakel v'tarya mean? Shakel v'tarya, he says, is a good word, deliberation. He deliberates. So Frierdiker Rebbe distinguishes that the deliberation here is not a seicheldike deliberation. It's in the Ratzon itself. Because generally when we say deliberate, we usually see it as an intellectual process. The mind deliberates to determine the value, the virtues of something. Is it right? Is it true? It's called analysis. It's called evaluation. It's called examination. You know, we examine an idea. And he says specifically in the power, it's in the Koyach HaBina that does it. And he explained that Chochmah, Bina, Das are 3 steps in the intellectual process. Chochmah is a concept, a nekuda, just a dot, a point of an idea. Bina is the place where we go through Shakavitarya. And he said 2 types of Shakavitarya. One, to establish is like he says, that even though it may appear that this idea is truthful in the first glance, through Shakavitarya, you find out, no, it's not a miti. It's a krumas fara. So he says that's what creates, so the first step, chaymer, the raw matter is the nekuda of chachmah. Bina gives it a tzura in that order, by explaining it in every detail and all the different theories. So he says that's why in Bina, Shakavitarya, first 2 things. One is to determine whether this is a true or a crooked idea, a straight idea or a clear idea or a distorted one. And Beis, who Ayin Beis shayches seichel zel l'svara zu. Because in explaining an idea, you can explain it with many different theories. The question is, does the theory apply to this idea? That's the second level of Shakavitarya. And Das, he says, Bo b'shichlel, Das completes the picture. Das is the final, like polishing, more than polishing, beautifying, the final complete, full dimensional concept. And that's when you make the determination. So Bina does the whole, let's put it this, Bina does the research and weighs all theories to determine what we just said, the truth, and what svara works. And Das finishes the process and makes the decision. This is the right thing to do from a seicheldik point of view. Now we're going to continue on top of page 54, line 6. The Khan, however, this was all about seichel, bina. The Khan, meaning here in the discussion of rotzen, of desire, inyan hashakavitarya hu barotzen gufa, ubarotzen gufa. Here we didn't reach seichel yet. We're not dealing with an intellectual process. In the desire itself, there is a shakavitarya to determine yes or no, should I desire, should I not desire? Im roy lirtzis im lav. Is it worth desiring or is it not worth desiring? And this level of rotzen, this is the higher level, this is rotzen hanelam, koyach rotzen. It was determined by him, sheroy lirtzis. He went through the back and forth and he determined it's worthy of desiring. Now, this is where we stopped Friday. So I was wondering, so what's the shakavitarya in rotzen? Does it have any seichel involved? What does it mean that you're deliberating in desire? What criteria are you using? So first I was thinking, does he mean to say that there's a chochma bina das in rotzen? That when rotzen begins to determine, because how do you determine? I mean, when you start thinking, is it worthy for me to buy this house? Is it worthy for me to do something, to go on a shlichus somewhere? And you're not sure. So you go back and forth, back and forth. What tools are you using for shakavitarya when he says berotzen atzmei? I'm just wondering out loud here. But then I said to myself, if he's using seichel, we said before that seichel is not part of the process here. This is a rotzen that's higher than tam. This is desire before there's intelligence even. So in other words, let's even talk by God in the divine consciousness. Let's say you're talking about a situation, a state where God has not yet made the determination that he's going to create. It's still shakavitarya. What is he weighing? The value. So this is not clear from what he's saying here. What is he using to weigh? If he's not using intelligence, so what factors are being used to determine is it worthy to desire or not to desire? I'm just asking out loud here. If anybody has a thought on that, please.
I would think that it would come to, you can't say that it has any intellectual basis. So you would just say it lech. How do you say it in Yiddish? Lech by him, that it lies by him, that it's a correct desire. You know, the famous story was at the Rebbe Rashab that they asked him his source for, was it washing hands 3 times or something? And he says, I don't know, but I just remember.
He said a sleiktzach, yeah.
I would think that that's maybe what the Shaklataya is in that level of not intellectual, but
Okay, that could be what you're saying. Basically, if I understand correctly, is that you're not deliberating the virtues or the qualities or is it right or wrong. You're deliberating whether it's something you really want.
want or feel that it's correct. It's a feeling that it is a good desire. It's proper or not. It's
Okay,
a feeling.
fine.
I'm not sure because in page 53 in the bottom, he's making a whole big thing that this has to do with the Gimel Moechen.
Are you reading with us? And he says, "Aval kana kavana the kan."
No, page 53.
And then he says, "But this is not." But then he says, "This is not what we're talking about here." On page 50, so after he finished that, he said, "But here we're talking about Shak V'Tanya and Ratzon alone, not with Seichel." That's why we're discussing it. The whole piece was to distinguish between Shak V'Tanya and Bina and Shak V'Tanya in Ratzon. But Ratzon Gufa is the way he puts it. I think what you're saying is right, Elias. I think that makes sense. Basically, it comes down to, one second, can everybody mute? There's some background noise here somewhere. It comes down to this. Obviously, with God, you can't say that he's not sure and he's determining. But with a human being, for sure, you can say that. It's more like, does it resonate as a thing you really want? And may not have anything to do with an intelligent process. Yeah, you could say that. But regardless, we're going back now. It's a Ratzon HaMuchlet, therefore. Not Ratzon HaMuchlet B'atzmusei. This is after they say this. There was already some inspiration and stimulation of a desire. Went back and forth. Okay, so then Huchlet, that this is what he's Sheroi Lirtzis, that's worthy to desire. I'm continuing on page 54. Now he's going back. However, this is only Achlotus Haskama Bolvad. It's a determined resolve. It's only a determined resolve. It's not, like he's going to say in a second, it's not a Rotzen Mamish. What did he define Rotzen Mamish? That you're actually pursuing it. If it's so desirable, why don't you yearn after it? Why aren't you drawn? Here it seems to be, okay, you made the determination. That's what he says. Achlote v'haskama b'vad. Achlote haskama b'vad. Before he said achlote v'haskama. But basically, achlote means a determination, a resolve, a resolution. Haskama means agreement, but here he means really determination. It's not an actual ratzon. V'yuchal limshach. And it's possible that limshach, that many years, kamashanim, that a number of years should pass, to the point that he should be inspired or stimulated with a ratzon, a desire and tshuka and a yearning mamish. So you can make this resolution, and it's very clear. We're talking about an absolute ratzon, not wishy-washy, ambiguous, but it could take years until you actually pursue and are drawn for the thing that you're desiring. So there you have two states of ratzon. U'makom mokim hari b'meshech hazman yoveh ratzon b'goli. Okay, so at this point, this ratzon has not yet been inspired to pursue, but nevertheless, within time, b'meshech hazman, this ratzon will become begoli v'gam yachul sheyavi b'peil. Not only will become revealed, meaning a revealed pursuit and yearning, but also an actualization of the ratzon. So this is the interesting dual properties here. He's going back and forth. Let me explain it. It's very vital here, because he wants to say that it's a state. It's two states, but one relates to the other. On one hand, the first level is already inspiration, but it's not any active pursuit of the thing you're desiring. And it could take years till that happens. But on the other hand, it will come to actualization. So in other words, the first ratzon is actually the cause for the second one. It took time. And it actually can come to real actualization. So if you ask the question, the first level of ratzon, how important is that? It's vital, because if you don't have that, you're not coming to the second one. He doesn't say that explicitly, but that's what he's saying. What's the reason that it actually comes into actualization or into goli? Goli would mean that you are, I assume he means you're in a revealed way pursuing that which you desire, not just that you desire it. And Yavi B'Peil means you're actualizing it. You're getting it. You're actually acquiring it. So it'd be like, okay, I want to have a home. For years, you didn't even know that. It was Muchlad Batzmuse, it's wired in you. At age 40, you decided, I want a home. Age 30, whatever the age is. That is now and it's not a question whether you do or you don't. It's not optional. You absolutely want it. It takes another 10 years. Let's go from 30 to 40. Let's make it not so depressing. And 10 years, you know what? You actually start pursuing. You start looking for homes. What kind of home? You're actually going. You see a process has begun. And then there's actually building or buying the home. That would be Yaveh B'Peil. So he's saying, so it ultimately was realized. The initial desire, which remained just passive and not active, has now been realized. So he says, that's what's the reason that you ultimately pursued it and actualized it? Because it was Neseder, it was already inspired or stimulated. Because it already was inspired, it was already stimulated. Maybe years earlier. And it was determined by him. He determined that it's worthy. That's why it came into Harotzen. That's why the desire happened back then. The only thing is, back then, it's possible that time should pass, an extended period of time, a period of time, a long period of time. Rabbis b'shanim could be many years. From the inspiration or the stimulation and the determination until it actually was actualized. So there's a connection between these two levels of Ratzon, and there's also a disconnect. Disconnect means, no, that's not a good word, not disconnect. There are two states, because one is still in a state of what do you say? What do you call it? There's absolute inspiration and a determination, but not pursuit. And the second state results from that, and it could be many years when it actualized and it comes into actualization. Now, is it possible it shouldn't come into actualization? We spoke about that. Of course it's possible. Not by God, but by a human being. Unfortunately, some people have very determinations and then they end up not, for whatever reason, not fulfilling it. And not because they didn't determine, not because they were ambiguous. It was because whatever reason, it just didn't happen. Okay. Well, and therefore, hine heskem zeh nikre machshava v'lei ratzon mamish. And this is the reason that this determination is called machshava, thought, and not actual desire. I know we said earlier it's a level in desire, but he's now breaking it down. He says it's more thought than it is desire. Why? Why can't you say it's a desire? So he says the ratzon is tzinner. Ratzon has the same letters as tzinner. Tzinner is a channel. Reish tzadik vav nun, tzadik nun vav reish. So desire is, the letters of desire means channel. U'kamoy hat tzinner, and like a channel, hariboy val yodei, in it and through it, hu amshachas hamayim chayim ma'amayim lekelim shenim. The sinner, the channel, through it, in it and through it, talk about channel, let's say channeling water when you're irrigating a field, let's say, right? Or in any other way, you want to direct water, a rain pipe, a gutter, etc. So what is it doing? The channel, well, in this case, he's talking about, sorry, I shouldn't use rainwater. He's talking about a river or water running from a mayon. So you have a wellspring. You have a live well. You want that water from that well to be, you want to draw that water into your home. So you need some channel. You need to draw it. So he says the channel, the tzinner could be a pipe. It could be a pump. Tzinner is basically anything that channels something from one place to another. So he says this tzinner, he goes like this. He says like this. Mayim chayim means the living waters of the well, spring. This tzinner, this channel, channels it lekalim, mikalim shenim, to different types of containers. You could have small pitcher, a big pitcher, a big basin, a pool. I mean, basically the channel channels it to different places, to different kalim. And the tzinner actually has a very important role. How is it channeled? According to how the tzinner carries the water, how it travels through the tzinner, and how it transmits, and how it draws it to whatever keli it is. In other words, if you had, let's say, a pump connected to a wellspring, the pump is then feeding into a channel, and the channel now is, you use a channel, and the channel, you direct it. If something is a small container, let's say, you'll just direct it, and it'll flow very slowly. If you want to flow bigger, you broaden it. The point is that the tzinner is playing a role. It's not the source of the water. All it is a funnel. It's a channel. But it is channeling, it basically carries the essential living waters of the wellspring, of the well, to different kalim, and it's like the interface. That's what a tzinner is. He's going to explain that's what rotzen is in a moment. So it's essentially a interface, a carrier between two things. So he says like this: Kach inyone shel harotzen. Same as the inyan, the personality, the identity of rotzen, which is the letter sinner. Shehut sinner, asher boy val yodei nimshech nafshe le'eze davar. It's a channel. Same letters, sinner. In it and through it, the nefesh, the spirit of the person, transmits or is drawn to any particular thing. So basically, if I were to spell it out, it will go like this. Something in the nefesh ha'adam begins to murmur, begins to, what's the word I want to use? Begins to become restless, and it's seeking something. So this rotzen is awakened. It could be many different ways that it gets awakened. A rotzen to have a home. I go back to the home because it's a good example, because it's inherent. The rotzen to have a home. Yeah. So now this thing, these stirrings, stir is the word. Your soul begins to be stirred. And ultimately, for the need for a home, or the want. What does rotzen do? Rotzen is the channel that carries that stirring. If you didn't have rotzen, God forbid, it could be a stirring like a person has in his spirit something, but there's no way to actualize it. So what happens, the rotzen becomes the channel that channels the stirring in the soul that it should be drawn to something specific. So based on that, the rotzen is only when it's actively pursuing something. That's why he's going to go back to say that the first level is not rotzen mamish for this reason. V'hainu, this state that we're talking about as a tzinner, as a channel, v'hainu shezeu b'spilus Shenispol benafshi ba'adavarahu. This is with the spilus. The spilus can be excitement. It can be some form of stimulation. That nispol benafshi, his nefesh is feeling the stirrings of something exciting in that object. Ba'adavarahu, whatever it is that the soul is yearning for. Avala heskim. But the first state of rotzen, that determination, ain't a rotzen be spilus adayin. It's not a rotzen that is in the form of any type of excitement. Ki'i machshava. It's a thought. It's an active thought, so it doesn't have the sinner element in it. A channel is a channel. A channel is not just a conceptual channel. A channel is channeling from the living waters of the well to the kalim. In the human spirits, it's channeling the spirit to fulfill its desire. But the rotzen that we talked about is a determination that it's a good thing to want. It's not active as a sinner. So he says, that's why we call it machshava. So sinner and his spilus and his sedus all seem to come, well, not his sedus, his spilus all come together. You have to be excitable about it and you have to be pursuing it. That's the condition of what he's calling our rotzen mamish. Okay.
It always has to be the first level of rotzen atzmi or lav davka.
Which rotzen atzmi are you talking about?
I'm talking when a person wants something. There is something, the
What do you
rotzen
call it? The heskim and the hachlat? The heskim and the hachlat?
No, before that.
He's not discussing that here. Why are we only talking about that?
Because before he spoke about vehine yesh oid madrego berotzen.
But we're not discussing, we're already a page away from that. He's not discussing it here at all.
Is the oid madrego, this is coming like levels. First you have rotzen atzmi, then you have the rotzen anelam, and then you have the chiluk between the heskem and the tzinoil. Or the rotzen atzmi is not always, I'm talking now about human being. When you have rotzen, you do something because you have a reason. There is a rotzen atzmi there, or there is no rotzen atzmi.
I'm hearing too many questions here at once. Let me just spell it out. First of all, he doesn't call it rotzen atzmi, he calls it rotzen hamuchlet. Let's clarify that. Rotzen atzmi he used earlier in the previous chapter on the love of parent to child and God to the neshamas. In the what you're quoting, he uses the word rotzen hamuchlet. So I just want to be careful in the language exactly.
Okay. So the rotzen hamuchlet.
Okay, good, Chris. I'm going to answer. Okay, 1 second. I didn't finish. I heard your question. I'm going to respond. So generally speaking, lamaila for sure. Humans, it would also be the case. It starts with rotzen hamuchlet. Well, first of all, there's higher than rotzen hamuchlet too. There's koydem alei. Let's not go there right now. There's oyer before rotzen hamuchlet. But rotzen hamuchlet is the way you're wired. It's yes, it is atzmizdik thing he said. It's the etzem, and doesn't need any stimulation altogether. You're not even aware of it necessarily. Like he says on page 53. So let's say the rotzen hamuchlet to have a home or to have a spouse. Then there's a stage, what he's talking about here, however, is not that level. That level is behind the scenes in the wiring of a person. Then comes the stage where you become aware. And there's an actual inspiration and stimulation. So I would say, yes, every rotzen hanelam or koyach harotzen, or what he's calling now machshava, originates probably in a rotzen hamuchlet. But he doesn't say it explicitly here. 1 second, let me finish. He doesn't say it explicitly here, but I would say yes. Lamaila for sure, there's rotzen hamuchlet, rotzen hanelam, and the rotzen hagoli. Then comes, it could be years between the stimulation and the inspiration of a determined rotzen, not shakavatari, determined, until you actually comes and starts inspiring you. Meaning that now you're being stimulated, like he says, is spilus, and you're a certain your emotion of being drawn to and pursuing and yearning for the thing you desire. And then and finally actualizing it. So you have the three. Ratzon HaMuchlet is always behind the scenes. Everything starts from there, but it's not directly starting from there because that is not even awareness. Here he's talking about two levels of awareness. You're aware of it, it's determined, but it's not actively pursuing the object. And then comes the pursuit. The pursuit comes because there was a Ratzon Hanelam, because there was the Machshava that determined that this is what I want. Then it could take years later, but now he's calling it, you can't call it Ratzon. He says not Ratzon Mamash because Ratzon is at Sinner, and at Sinner is already a flow. It's only the final level of Ratzon. So there are three levels, but he's made it very clear here in this Maimer that he doesn't want to talk about level one. He said clearly, Lizoyer. He said, T'chein tzarech lizoyer. That's why you have to be careful. We're not talking about Ratzon HaMuchlet Ba'atzmusei. You asked me a question whether that's behind. The answer is yes, but that's not at all what he wants to talk about. That's why he said, be careful not to mix the two. Then there's a Ratzon HaMuchlet, which is an active determination and resolve. And now there's the actual tzimid of drawing. So now we gave it another name. It's called Machshava, not the Ratzon Mamish, the level called the Ratzon Hanelam. So for all practical purposes, we're talking about two levels of Ratzon, not three here. Okay?
Rabbi Jacobson, I missed a little before, but isn't the Frierdiker Rebbe in this mimer coming to explain Ayin Beis, or is it a separate discussion on Ratzon?
Well, you have to learn Ayin Beis, and you'll see how he's explaining it. Yeah,
because the Ratzon that we were talking about earlier when you began the shir is, there's no time there, Meshach Zman. There's no time at that level. It's so much higher than any of these concepts of Meshach Zman or fulfilling it. So it seems like he's bringing it down to
because he's interchanging between the human example and God. In above, it's conceptual. Below, it's time. That's all.
But with God, there would not be any.
I just said he's interchanging between the God and the human. This is an example. He's using an example we can relate to. In our case, it's time. And above, it's conceptual time.
Conceptual.
Yeah. Anyway, this is Ayin Beis with explanation. As a matter of fact, what we're reading now is actually Ayin Beis chapter 65. But this is an elaboration on Ayin Beis I mentioned at the beginning of the class, pages 1147 through 1149. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Who? Back to the Heskim. So he's explaining, it's a determined and resolved in his thought that he should desire this. But he's still removed relatively from being excited or being stimulated by the objective, by the desired, by that which is being the desire, the thing that's being desired. He's removed from that excitement, the way it is exciting when you're talking about the Ratzon Goli, there it is excited. So he's removed from that. So that determination is in his spirit, but that's it. It's removed. And therefore, this determination, and that's why this determination, which is the root of the power of desire, and the source of the concealed Ratzon. Cholok Meratzon Hagoli is distinguished from is different from the revealed Ratzon. Va'aratzon the Mahus Mitziyusei, Hu Hatoya V'amshachal Eisei Adov V'shureitze. B'mkeim Amidosim Be'evri HaNefesh. Oh, 1 second. Okay. Okay, I see this is starting a whole new subject, so I would suggest we'll stop here. In the middle of page 54, let's stop here. Because it's going to a whole new thing, and I don't want to do halfway. You have to go into the whole new topic. And this is actually the Friedrich Rebbe's explanation in Ayin Beis, chapter 65. So we have a lot of Ayin Beis working here. The 65, there's page 1147. Friedrich Rebbe is combining them all and explaining it. So let me stop here. So, okay, so we introduced Machshava, and there's the two levels. They relate to each other, but they're also, one is removed from the other. Because one is in a state of total stimulation in the sense I'm pursuing it, at sinner, and the other one is just the determination and it's not being drawn yet to it. That's the gist of it. Anybody have any questions?